Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Is the Senate, the world's greatest deliberative body, broken? Well, I'll spoil it here for you. Lance and I think it is. And today we're going to outline why we think it's broken and also the importance of what it means that it's broken, right? I mean, this is something we all talk about government. We're all aware that it's there. But do we often take time to think, are these institutions functioning the way they were meant to? Well, in the Senate's case, we don't think so. And there's an article in the Wall Street Journal, an opinion piece, called Make the Senate Great Again. Yes, obviously a play on words here, but we are going to review the 8 items in this article that are recommended by the author, who we'll talk a little bit more about here in a minute. We're going to review those 8 items and tell you whether or not Lance and I think these are the things needed to fix the Senate. We'll also talk to you about things maybe not mentioned that we think would be helpful as well. But of course, we can begin a conversation on the Senate and bring you all up to speed without.
True Chat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, is the Senate broken? That's almost a rhetorical question. Just take this for granted, all right, that here we are in a pandemic with citizens struggling and medicine not being available to all people and a rise in the virus. And I'm not getting political here, but I guess I am. I don't care whether you want the new Supreme Court nominee or you want the president to wait. But that is the item that the Senate is in session for. The Senate is not in session today, folks. We can't get an economic deal made because the leader of the Senate is not in session until next week. But he is allowing the committee to hold hearings on the new Supreme Court justice. So you tell me if it's broken or not. That it's more important to get someone sitting on the Supreme Court than it is to take care of the American citizens who are struggling through this pandemic and trying to hold their lives together and the lives of their family members.
Well, and should it even be an either or, Lance? Isn't the whole thing, right? I mean, what these folks are paid to do is to do both of these things. And why is it impossible for them to, work on an economic stimulus bill and do the other thing that constitutionally they're supposed to do? Why is it we can only now work on one thing at a time, right? And, some things are going to take years and years and years, and other things we can do in 3 weeks if we're really motivated. And again, this isn't I know there's obviously current situations people are going to pin this on. This is not specific really to the current situations, more of it's a long standing over the last number of years track record of the way the Senate continues to operate and continues to eliminate, and both Republicans and Democrats have done it when they've been in control, eliminated rules that make the Senate what the Senate is. And so the question becomes, well, what is it now? The article opens, Lance, by saying, what would the founding fathers think of America if they came back to life? Their eyes would surely bug out first at our technology and wealth. But I suspect they'd also be stunned by the deformed structure of our government. The Congress they envisioned is all but dead. The Senate in particular is supposed to be the place where Americans hammer out our biggest challenges with debate. That hasn't happened for decades. The rot is bipartisan. And that's before he leads into this stuff. But tell us about the author of this article, Lance, because I think this is it's important that at least people know, right?
Well, he's one of our friendly conservatives that we don't tend to agree with very often. So in all fairness and transparency, but Mr. Ben Sasse has some interesting ideas. He is a Republican senator. But in this case, we think he's touched a really hot button. He tends to vote more conservatively, but we couldn't agree with him more that the Senate is broken. His 8 ideas here that he's put forward, they are all very interesting. I don't agree with all of them. I think some of them could work, but I appreciate the fact that he's brought this up, and he used a key word there in the opening that you read. He said this is a bipartisan problem. and that I couldn't agree with him more. We're all about breaking down those barriers and learning to talk with people who feel differently about the issues than you do, and forming some kind of consensus that will make the country run more effectively. And I think that's what he's trying to do here.
A lot of different people have suggested the filibuster is part of the problem. And I tend to agree with Mr. Sass, at least on this point, that the filibuster is not the problem. In fact, it's part of what keeps the Senate what the Senate is. And if you get rid of it, it will lead to even more 51-49 votes and even less debate and less compromise in the Senate, which is kind of what the Senate's supposed to be about, right? The Senate's culture, as he writes, needs dramatic change aimed at promoting debate, not ending it. Here are some ideas. The first one, and this will be a controversial one, cut the cameras. Most of what happens in committee hearings isn't oversight, it's showmanship. Senators make speeches that get chopped up, shipped to home state TV stations, and blasted across social media. They aren't trying to learn from witnesses, uncover details, or improve legislation. They're competing for sound bites. Now, he explains, Lance, the one exception, however, is the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, which a majority of that work's done in secret, and it's his opinion that without the posturing and the cameras, they actually get real stuff done on that committee that benefits the American people. The difference is it's a lot of stuff that we never learn about. Now, he does say that other committees, could keep transparency by making transcripts and audio available to the public after the hearings, but get rid of the cameras themselves, and definitely no live camera streaming of Senate hearings. For the reason that he believes that it encourages showmanship and defeats the purpose of the committee, which is for them to actually ask questions and investigate. Which, you see on both sides right now obviously with the Supreme Court nominee, right? Nobody really gives a damn what the answers are. They're just interested, if they're the Republicans, they're just interested in throwing softballs that are easy for her to answer. And if they're Democrats, they just want to try to ask gotcha questions, that they know that, in many cases, no justice who was going through a confirmation hearing that was worth their salt would answer. So, it's both sides doing it, but it's that showmanship, right?
Well, I've got two thoughts, and one of them goes along with if you did watch any of the confirmation hearings, and it's not so much the questions that they ask that I was going to comment on, but the fact of the speeches that they give before they ever ask a question. In that all they're doing is saying, making that soundbite so that they can show it when they're running for reelection. Look, this is what I said when we were talking about the Supreme Court nominee. And that's not what's done. And that obviously is done for the cameras. So my complaint is not more with the softball or the gotcha questions, but I don't like the posturing with the speeches that they give in prelude to their questions. And then the second thing is, I'm maybe one of those weirdos. I have actually watched C-SPAN and C-SPAN 2 and C-SPAN 3. It's not particularly dramatic television viewing, so I don't really have a problem with them meeting without cameras, because there's also congressional records for everything that's ever been said in the Senate and the House that is public access that you can get anytime you want. So we've already done what he says by keeping transparency, by making transcripts and real-time audio available. I really kind of like this idea, because then you're doing the work, you're not working for the cameras. So on this one, I have to really agree. And I don't think there's a problem with things going on behind closed doors. And for the honesty of it, I'm okay with some things going on behind closed doors. I think sometimes that's when you get things done. And I'm sorry, okay, if that upsets some people, but I believe that. I've worked on committees and talked to people in charge, and the posturing that's done for the public is totally different than what's done behind closed doors. And unfortunately, right or wrong, more work has gotten done in my lifetime, right, with leadership behind closed doors than it has publicly, because most people aren't desiring to be truly honest in public. and they will be behind closed doors.
Yep. And I think that, well, there's a place and time for the cameras, and the Senate floor, when debate's happening, might be a different conversation. But these committees, and this actually kind of goes into the next one, which is abolishing standing committees. The original purpose of committees was to get work done and divide up legislative work. That was the point. But the Senate now operates about 20 permanent fiefdoms, as the author calls them. Dividing legislative work is important, but there's no corporation that would tackle its problems by creating 20 permanent committees and running every decision through them. And I think that's an excellent point, in my opinion. The Senate should instead create temporary 2-year committees, each devoted to making real progress on one or two big problems. In other words, we're creating this committee specifically to address one or two things. And once those have been addressed, the committee goes away, right? And not have all these. I mean, there's only 100 senators, folks, right? 20 standing committees for 100 people. I mean, oh my God. It's no wonder nothing gets done.
I couldn't agree more. Again, I think this is, he's 2 for 2 here. I don't think we need that many permanent subcommittees to get things done. Because again, what it's become, in my opinion, is senators jockeying for positions on the committees that, quote, have more power, or by power, I mean, they have more face time. You have more ability to show your constituents how hard you're working. Aren't you all there to do the same job? Don't you have to vote on all things? So why shouldn't you just work on those things together as a group and not be splintered into 20 different groups? And then, your time's okay. I guess the counter argument is your time's divided into 5 or 6 items instead of all of them. But I would rather have you somewhat cognizant of all the things that are going on in the Senate, rather than knowing your 5 things and only talking about your 5 or 6 things from your committee.
We've got a lot more to talk about: packing the floor, living together, canceling re-election, repealing the 17th Amendment. Mr. Ben Sasse has a number of suggestions. Lance and I are going to run through them all and let you know what we think. To find out our thoughts, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Make the Senate great again. To restore the world's greatest deliberative body, we need to think big. That's the assertion of Senator Ben Sasse. We've reviewed a few of the items so far. We're continuing right on in that same vein. This next one, pack the floor. Serious debate happens only if senators show up. 99% of the time you see a senator talking on the floor of the Senate, he's speaking to a chamber somewhere between 0 and 2 colleagues are present. Think about that, folks. When you typically hear, right, like if you do the Lance and you tune into C-SPAN and you see the senator on the floor talking, have you ever looked around at the rest of the room and noticed, gee, it looks kind of empty in here? That's because
it is.
Right. That's because nobody else is there. That's because often people are not there for debate. And the assertion here by Mr. Sasse is, let's change the rules. Elections have consequences. The majority leader should control the majority of the Senate's time, but committees should be able to command specific time for specific debates, and all senators should have to be present when debate is underway. Because again, is it really a debate, Lance, if I stand in a room with a podium by myself and, just say stuff? I don't know if that counts. What are we debating? I'm just proclaiming things.
Right. I haven't worked in the business world in a long time because I've spent the last 35 years working as an educator in the public school system and the collegiate system. That'd be like me going to work and walking the hallways and hanging out in the office and drinking a cup of coffee and only appearing in my classroom a couple of times a day. Now, I had 6 classes or 7 classes per day, but I might only appear in 2 of them because I was busy on campus and other places. I don't think I would keep my job very long for that, so I do think, and then, I was on committees too. Education's great for committees. Absolutely love committees, folks. But we had to do that outside of the time that we were supposed to be doing our job. So what's the big deal about having times that you would have to be there and then go work on your committees? But then I also have this okay, we can't talk about packing the floor because of committee stuff because we want to get rid of committees. So maybe if there are no committees, then we don't have to worry about people going to the committee. And now I'm talking in circles, but I'm trying to do my best imitation of a U.S. senator. But you get rid of the committees and you don't have to be on a committee. And so then you can be present to do your job. To me, this is a no-brainer. Why are you not? And again, everybody says, well, but you don't know how busy these guys are and the phone calls they have to take. Wait a minute. Don't you have to take phone calls in your life? Don't you have other responsibilities besides your job? And what happens if you spend more time on those responsibilities than you do your job? I think in most businesses, you lose your job.
Right.
So why should the senators be any different? Their job is to help govern the country and represent us, the American people. So have them do their job and then take care of their business outside of the time that they're supposed to be doing their job.
Most people in life that I know, Lance, and I don't know many of them, but the few people that I know that make $173,000 a year, they're expected to work pretty hard and deliver quite a lot of results. Most people don't make $173,000 a year if they're not pretty good at what they do. And I would contend that most of our senators are not very good at making full use of the taxpayers' dollars, right? Because you could say, well, yeah, but they got to spend all this time on campaigning and fundraising. Well, but that's not what they're getting paid for, right? No. What they're getting paid for is to show up on the freaking Senate floor and debate and show up to their committees. That's what they're paid to do, not to campaign. So I don't care if they're busy. I would like to get my $173,000 out of them. And frankly, I think anymore, that's probably too much because I'm not sure what we're paying them for when we can't get anything done. But that kind of goes into the next thing because we've talked a lot about division. Live together. I think this one is, I feel strongly about this one for sure of our list so far. It's pretty straightforward. A lot of time is spent demonizing the opposition, but senators can get along quite well. Senators should live, eat, and meet in dormitories when the Senate is in session. It's hard to demonize people you spend time with every day. Yep. I know a lot of Biden supporters. I know a lot of Trump supporters, and I can tell you that the ones that I know personally, I have a lot more tolerance for the ones that I have never met. And I think that's just a human nature thing. You realize these are people too, right? They have families, they have obligations, they have wants and desires. And, we're all a little nicer to each other if we have to spend time together than if we don't. If we never have to see those people and we can show up to the floor and say our bit and nobody else is there, and then we never see any of them the rest of the time, it's a lot easier to yell and scream at each other than if you know and have met somebody's family or had a meal with them.
It's not that our government was perfect 50 years ago, but when I was growing up and following this stuff as I did as a young man, there wasn't this division and argument of nothing getting done. There were arguments and debates over what direction the country should go, and then there was a vote on that direction. And that's what bipartisanship. It isn't that we're all sitting around the tree, singing Kumbaya and getting along. We can have honest debates. We can have honest disagreements. But when it's done, we sit down and break bread together and talk about the important things like, how's your family doing? Well, how's your family doing? And how's your health? And how are your children doing in school? Those are the important things to all of us, whether you're a common worker like we are and most of you are, or a U.S. senator. And if you're living together and you do that, but see, that was done. That's my point, is that was done 50 years ago.
Right.
So if it takes living together to get this done, then I'm all for it. Because folks, for you younger listeners in our audience, this isn't the way the government has always worked. Okay. Not even in my short lifetime. I'm not even going all the way back to the founding fathers and what was going on. But just in the 60 years that I've been alive, this is an outlier, what we're seeing now. This isn't the way the government used to work. And so I know it can be done. And I think Mr. Sass is onto something. And you too, Justin, when you sit down and spend time with people and you find out that they have the same concern, their parents are getting older and getting sick and they're trying to figure out how to take care of them while they're working in Washington, D.C. And they have some of the same issues and concerns in life about their children and getting them their education and wanting the best for them that you do. Then all of a sudden it's not that we all start to agree. We're still going to disagree, but we can get something done. We can move the country forward. And that's the bottom line.
The next one, the next two are kind of, these are the big ones, right? The probably most controversial ones. Cancel re-election. We ought to propose a constitutional amendment to limit every senator to one term, but we should double the term from 6 years to 12 years. Senators who don't have to worry about short-term popularity can work instead on long-term challenges. This is kind of interesting because when we've talked about, quote unquote term limits before or something like that, right? We've talked about the idea, well, we'll limit them to 2 terms, right? Or 3 terms or whatever. That way we'll limit the amount of time they spend on elections. This one's different and basically saying there is no re-election. Once you're in there, that's it. There ain't nothing else. And instead of 6 years, you're getting 12, this kind of, for what it's worth, this sort of follows the philosophy of like the FBI director. Okay. Sort of, in that the FBI director, yes, is appointed by a president, serves a 10-year term, however. And the thinking there, right, is that it's an apolitical position, supposedly. And the thinking here is kind of similar in, let's put him in there. And yes, they're elected via a political system, but they're no longer beholden to it once they're in there because why? They can't get reelected. So, the other thing this does, and this is his point kind of on the next bit, because this is a 2-part one. He's saying if that's a bridge too far, let's at least ban fundraising while the Senate is in session in Washington. It's an everyday experience to sit down at a $2,000 a plate lunch fundraiser and then run over to make committee votes. Lobbying is protected by the First Amendment, but it shouldn't be the primary focus of senators when they have work to do. If you canceled re-election, right, then this second part's kind of null and void because you don't need to fundraise because you ain't running again. So there's, generally speaking, you can't serve in the Senate again. So there's nothing to fundraise for. Now you could go run for something else, I suppose. This second part, I'm definitely in favor of the second part. If people aren't willing to do the first part, we don't like that, fine. But definitely the second part. Again, that goes back to what I think we were talking about before. You are paid to be there, right, to do the work of the Senate, not to fundraise. So when the Senate's in session, you should not be allowed to fundraise.
Well, here's where I'm going to disagree with you and Mr. Sass on both points. Number one, I've never been a proponent of term limits, and this is any way you dress it up. This is a term limit. I don't think that people are as effective when they're not running for reelection. It takes away from their influence and their power to get things done. So I'm not a believer in any form or fashion of term limits in any way, because what if you get somebody who's really good in doing all the things that you would like to have done and the country's really moving forward and they're like, oh, okay, now you're done. You got to go find another job in the government. Okay, so they do. I mean, because we've seen it happen. We have a governor here in Ohio who has done that. He's sold all kinds of political jobs in our state and in our national government because of term limits. So the good ones, or, the ones who have the power and the influence, can find other jobs. But I'm not a big believer of term limits at all. So I don't agree with this whatsoever. And my contention with the second part that you talked about, it's my lunch hour. And maybe it's because I was a union person, but it's my lunch hour. Whatever I want to do on my lunch hour is my lunch hour. That doesn't have anything to do with my job. So if I want to go attend a fundraiser during my lunchtime, then I can go attend a fundraiser during my lunchtime, as long as I get back to the work when I'm supposed to get back to work. Because I used to get calls in, well, we saw Mr. Jackson at Walmart at 11:45. Wasn't he supposed to be at school? Well, that was my lunchtime from 11:15 to 12. And if I wanted to go to Walmart to take care of some personal business during my lunchtime, that was my lunchtime. And it wasn't any of the citizens' responsibility or concern about where I was. Why wasn't I on the school grounds? Because that was my 45 minutes of uninterrupted lunch.
I mean, one thing obviously that I think a lot of Americans probably, I know you do, Lance, but I know a lot of Americans aren't really familiar with what Senate in session thing, right? Well, you hear about when they go into recess. Sometimes they're in recess for 2 or 3 weeks. So I'm saying they want to do what they want during that recess. Perfectly fine. They're not being paid, quote unquote, to be a senator during that time. But generally, and maybe this is where more definition around what's in session is needed, if we're paying them for when they're in session, 24/7 while they're in session, there is no lunch, there is no time off, you're in session. If that's what we mean, then they should not be allowed to fundraise during that time. If that's not what we mean, fine, but then let's define it, because I think part of the problem comes into play of it's not really defined. It's, well, you're expected to be in town, but you just kind of do whatever you want. Show up to your committee, show up to the floor, if you feel like it. And that to me is where the lines need to be clear. I'm fine with, we'll designate these hours during the day and say that's when you're expected to be on the Senate floor, and you have this time to do your own stuff, to sleep, to do whatever. In the next segment, we're going to get to the last three: repeal the 17th Amendment, sunset everything, and make a real budget. We've got more thoughts to share. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
I knew we'd get to the slightly more contentious ones, like canceling re-election and fundraising restrictions. Do you think that if we were more clear about when the Senate is working, that then we could ban fundraising during work hours?
I'm okay with that. We can sit down and talk about that if we were both senators, I think, and come to some conclusion. But let's move on, because I like these last three very, very much to talk about them.
Repeal the 17th Amendment. For those that aren't familiar, it was ratified in 1913. It replaced the appointment of senators by state legislatures with direct election. In case you didn't know this tidbit about American history, until 1913, senators of the United States were not elected by the people of their states. They were, in fact, chosen by state legislatures. And I think the contention here is what he says. The old saying used to be that all politics is local, but today, thanks to the internet, 24/7 cable news, and a cottage industry dedicated to political addiction, politics is polarized and national. That would change if state legislatures had direct control over who serves in the Senate.
Nope.
And Lance is a no.
Any power you take away from the American people, I'm usually not for it, as long as they're not harming other individuals. If you're harming somebody else, take away any power you want. But people should get to vote on who their representatives are, whether it's in the member in the House of Representatives, whether it's in the Senate, on city council, mayoral, whatever. So this was done to give the people power. I don't want to put more power into the hands of politicians. That's why politics is polarized and national. So while I agree with Mr. Sass on a lot of his stances, not only in this article, but in others and other things that he's done as a senator, this one I couldn't disagree with more. Now, he says that the reason it's polarized and national is the internet, 24/7 cable news, and cottage industry. That's true. I can see that and accept that part of it. I mean, we could have a debate about it, but I kind of see that. So I'm just a really strong no. Sorry, your arguments aren't enough to convince me to agree with this one.
I think it's an interesting thing that I'd be open to listening and thinking more about, but there's so many other things in here that I feel like will make a real difference right away. Sunset everything. For decades, Pennsylvania Avenue has been a one-way street as authority flowed from Congress to the executive branch. When the unelected bureaucracy gets power, it doesn't let go. We ought to end that by having the Senate create a super committee dedicated to reviewing all such delegations of power over the past 80 years, and then proposing legislation to sunset the authority of entire bureaucracies on a rolling basis. Does, say, the Health and Human Services Department ever answer for its aggressive regulatory lawmaking? Of course not. Sunset all of its authority in 12 months and watch lawmakers start to make actual laws. I think the concept here, right, is don't leave things in place forever just because they were once put in place a long time ago. Things should be reviewed, and lawmakers should have to make tough decisions and not be allowed to say, well, somebody else decided it long ago, and we're just, we don't really have an opinion on it.
What I take from this, and it's an entirely different tact. I'm not saying you're wrong, but what I take from this is historically we started with this about the founding fathers. And if you go back to our founding fathers, they said the Senate, they said the legislative branch should be the branch where, should really run the country. And I know that we have, checks and balances and three branches and it's all equal. But the founding fathers really thought that the legislative branch should be the leaders of the country. And in the legislative branch, they wanted the Senate to be the main leaders. I mean, the most respected job you could have in the early years of the American Republic was to be a U.S. senator. The presidency was, even after George Washington, was kind of looked at like, yeah, okay, what you really wanted to do was be a senator because you had the ability to get things done. And I think what Mr. Sass is explaining here is that we have all of these unfunded mandates and bureaucracy coming from the White House that the Senate never even wanted to happen, or Congress never even wanted to happen. And doesn't the Constitution say that laws should come from the legislative branch? And the executive branch, i.e. the president, their job is to enforce those laws passed by the Congress. And that's what I get from this. So, when he says, does Health and Human Services Department ever answer for its aggressive regulatory lawmaking? Of course not. Well, why are they making laws anyway? Daggone it. They're members of the executive branch. That's a committee that the executive branch has started over the years. We go back and Washington had 3 cabinet positions, and now we're in the teens because we add and subtract, and the president can, get all the help he wants. And I'm not against the executive branch doing that, but why in the world, and I couldn't agree with Mr. Sass more, why is the executive branch making regulatory laws? That's the job for the legislative branch. So, couldn't agree more, because if that were to happen, as Mr. Sass says, I agree, just sit back and watch the legislative branch start to make laws. Instead of reacting to executive branch memos, they would actually be in there learning what needed to be done and making the law themselves, and making what law was best for all Americans, not what was best to get a president reelected.
It's becoming more and more we waste all this money on a Congress that really isn't doing anything, because they mostly just react either negatively or positively to what the executive branch is doing. And as Lance has pointed out, that was not the way it was envisioned. It was more of the legislative branch should decide on direction and plans for the country, and the executive branch should figure out how to carry it out, and instead the opposite has happened. Well, not even the opposite. The executive branch has taken we're going to lead the way and execute it all.
Executive branch, execute. Yeah. I'm using my English there. Yeah. What's the root word in executive? Execute. Your job is to execute the plan, not make the plan. You can suggest the plan. The president can suggest to Congress all the things they want, but they're supposed to execute the plan, not make the plan.
Congress's job to make the law, the president's job to enforce the law, i.e. execute the law. Next one, final one. This is a big one that Lance and I have talked about. It's make a real budget. The budget process is completely broken, and every couple of months, lawmakers are faced with a monumentally stupid decision. Shut the government down or spend 102% of what was spent last year with no oversight. It's an endless series of all or nothing brinkmanship fights, continuing resolutions, omnibus spending deals, and debt ceiling hikes. We ought to fix that with 2-year budgeting that includes all federal spending, including entitlements. We ought to end the distinction between appropriation and authorization. Legislation that authorizes federal action should also appropriate the money to pay for it. Duh. I don't know. Sorry.
Well, all I can say is this is a huge issue that we've talked about. But very simply, I'm going back. I'm pulling the old man card out again. Sorry for the listeners. But this is the way it used to be. Whether they agreed with the budget or not, it was made and it was in place for 2 years. And if something spectacular or horrible happened, then they broached the subject and tried to find money to take care of that if there was a hurricane or a pandemic or whatever. There wasn't this, well, we're going to make it for 90 days until we can really get something done. And so everything that Mr. Sass is asking for is the way the Senate and the House used to work. It's not the way they work in the current climate. So it's not that hard to envision being able to do what was done 30 years ago. I don't know why it's so hard, but it is hard. Whatever's going to get us there, get us back to doing that kind of thing. And again, I'm not saying that 30 years ago there weren't big budget fights. There were, but there was a budget and everybody knew what you had and you could plan for it and you could plan with it and move on and then argue 2 years later for what you thought should change with it. And that's where we need to be, because right now, too many local municipalities and states are up in the air and they don't know what to do or what direction to go. And they can't make any long-term planning on infrastructure or anything else because they don't know what's coming from the federal government, because the federal government doesn't know what's going on. Leadership means you get your act together, you put things in place, and then the rest of us will follow. And we can't do that at the local level and state level because we're not getting it from the federal government. So amen on getting a budget every 2 years and sticking with it, and then just adjusting for any outside influences that weren't anticipated for.
It bogs everything down, not getting it done. And it bogs everything down every year unnecessarily because, again, as Lance has pointed out, it doesn't change that much from year to year anyway. So there's no reason that it should be an annual thing. Congress has the authority to override the budget if they need to anyway. So why are we doing this every year and wasting months of taxpayer dollars on a budget that really doesn't change that much from a year to year basis anyway? The only thing I'd add to this, Lance, because it's a big thing of mine, is no budget, no pay. Make it a 2-year budget. And if you don't pass the budget on time, you no longer get paid until you pass it, and you do not get back pay. Because the one time no budget, no pay was passed, it only lasted like a year. And the deal was, once you pass it, you'll then get your back pay. No. You didn't do your job. I'm sorry. That's like one of the only things that's mentioned in the federal constitution about your job is to pass a budget. So pass the damn budget on time, do your job. And if you don't do your job, then you don't get paid until you start doing it again. Exactly
right. And the other thing that this does is if you're spending time arguing about the budget or finding a budget, you're not spending time passing legislation to push the country forward. So you're taking time away from the job that the rest of your job that you were sent there to do. Yes, coming up with a budget is part of your job, but the more often you have to argue about that, the less time you have to take care of other problems. Well, Justin, I think we've done it, but we've got that mission here at True Chat, and we're supposed to have shows that educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And I don't know about you, but I think we've done that today. We've taken a piece Did we do our job from a politician? Well, I'm asking you. I think we did. I think we had open, honest, and respectful conversations. We didn't agree on every issue with the author, nor did we agree with every issue with each other, but we made it through a show without anybody getting up and storming off and ripping off their mask and getting mad and going home. So, I think we've shown that it can be done, that you can have this argument and you can have these debates and agree to disagree and move on, but still agree on some things, because there were things of those 8 points that you and I agreed upon. So we can move forward on those and table the rest to discuss at a later time. So yeah, I think we've accomplished our mission statement today. Excellent. So if people want to spread the word, get more involved in this conversation, because we're a syndicated radio program and a podcast, how can people invite their friends to tune into the podcast? Well, that's the key here, right? We got to get more people to listen, more people to jump on the bandwagon and push our elected leaders to do the kinds of things that we talk about here. So you can tell them they can find us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found. For the State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller. I'm Lance Jackson. Special thanks to our recording producer, Devin McCain, editing producer, Bradley Butch. Thank you all, our listeners, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.